My family kicked me out for following my dreams. But when I became a millionaire at 28, I secretly bought their house and forced them to pay rent without knowing I was the owner. I'm 28 years old. I'm the CEO of my own tech company, and what I'm about to tell you probably sounds like one of those revenge stories you see in movies. But I swear all of this happened exactly as I'm going to tell you. 6 years ago, my life completely changed in a matter of 24 hours, and it all started with a simple conversation during dinner at my parents' house. I guess I should start there, when I still lived with them and things, well, weren't perfect, but at least I had a roof over my head. My parents, Francis and Marilyn, were always those people who have everything planned out. You know, everything has to be a certain way, or it just doesn't work in their world. My father had his own business consulting firm. Nothing huge, but he did well, and my mother worked in marketing for a medium-sized firm. For as long as I can remember, they told me I was going to study business, that I was going to work in finance or administration, that was the path to success. It wasn't even a conversation. It was just what was going to happen, period. I was in my third year of college studying business administration at a decent public university, living at home to save money, and honestly, I hated every second of those classes. I'd sit there listening to market strategies and financial statements, and all I could think was that I'd rather be doing anything else. What I was really passionate about was programming. I had started learning on my own when I was like 16, just for fun, making small programs and trying to understand how things worked. By the time I got to college, I already knew Python, JavaScript, was learning Java, and I spent all my nights and weekends programming instead of studying for my business classes. My grades were barely acceptable, like B-, C+, because I simply didn't care. But in programming, that's where I excelled. I had taken a couple of elective computer science classes, and the professors told me I had natural talent, that I should consider changing majors. And after 3 years, torturing myself with classes I hated, I finally decided that was exactly what I was going to do. I got home that day. It was a Tuesday, I think, or maybe Wednesday. I'm not sure, but I remember perfectly how my stomach felt all twisted while I practiced in my head how I was going to tell them. My girlfriend Alexis, who I'd known since high school, had been supporting me on this for months, telling me I had to be honest with my parents, that it was my life and my decision. So during dinner, while we were eating baked chicken my mother had made, I dropped the bomb. I told them, hey, I need to talk to you about something important. I'm going to change my major from business administration to computer science. Just like that, no beating around the bush. The silence that followed was one of those uncomfortable ones that seems to last forever. My father put his fork down on his plate and looked at me like I had just told him I was going to join the circus. My mother just shook her head with that condescending expression she made when she thought I was saying something stupid. And then my father spoke, with that calm but hard voice he used when he was really angry, and said, Maxwell, you're not going to throw 3 years of education in the trash over a whim. I explained that it wasn't a whim, that it was something I was passionate about, that I was good at it, that computer science had an incredible future. My mother interrupted, saying that programming was for nerds without social skills and that I had potential for something better. Something better. As if what I wanted to do wasn't worth anything. The conversation escalated quickly. My father started talking about all the money they had invested in my education, about how I was ungrateful, about how in his house you followed his rules. I tried to stay calm, but I was also getting angry because basically they were telling me my opinion didn't matter, that my life wasn't mine. I told them it was my future, not theirs, and that I was going to change majors with or without their support. That was the breaking point. My father stood up from the table, his face was red, and he told me that if that was my decision, then I could do it on my own, without his house, without his money, without anything. I thought he was exaggerating, being dramatic to scare me into changing my mind. But then my mother backed him up completely and said I had 24 hours to pack my things and get out of their house. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't process what was happening. I asked them if they were serious, and my father just repeated, 24 hours, Maxwell. After that, we're changing the locks. I went to my room shaking, not from fear, but from that weird mix of fury and shock that leaves you kind of paralyzed. I called Alexis crying, which embarrassed me because I don't usually cry, but I was completely overwhelmed. process everything. Then I called my best friend, Dominic, who shared a small apartment with another roommate, and explained the situation. Without hesitating, he told me I could stay with him as long as I needed, that his couch was mine. The next 24 hours were a blur. I packed all my clothes, my books, my laptop, which thank God I had bought myself with money from a summer job, my personal stuff. I didn't really have much. Maybe like 6 boxes total. My parents didn't even come out of their room while I was loading everything into Alexis's car, which she lent me because I didn't have my own car. I'd never needed one living at home. The last time I saw the house where I grew up was in the rearview mirror as we drove away, and I felt like something had been ripped from my chest. It wasn't that I missed my parents at that moment. I was too angry for that, but it was my home, the only place I had known for 22 years. Dominic's apartment was tiny, like a studio converted into a place for 2 people, and now 3. His other roommate was named Josh, and he was cool about it, but it was still obvious we were cramped. I slept on the living room couch, which was one of those old second-hand ones that creaks when you move, and kept my stuff in boxes stacked in a corner. The first few days were the hardest. I had to make decisions about my immediate future, and I had no money, literally nothing. My parents were paying my tuition, and I had been completely dependent on them financially. I went to talk to the university's financial aid office to see if I could get student loans or some emergency scholarship. But it was mid-semester, and basically they told me I could apply for the next academic year. But for now I was on my own. I did the math. I needed at minimum $800 a month to cover my share of rent with Dominic and Josh, plus food, transportation, and I still had to pay tuition for the next semester if I wanted to continue studying. I had no savings. I had nothing. Alexis offered to lend me money, but she was also a student working part-time at a coffee shop. She didn't have much to give. Dominic insisted I not worry about rent for a couple months, but I knew I couldn't abuse his generosity. He was also tight on money, so I had to make one of the hardest decisions of my life. I dropped out of college. I simply couldn't afford it and work enough hours to survive at the same time. The idea was to work full-time, save money, and maybe return to study later when I had the resources. That part was really hard because dropping out of college meant my parents had won in a certain sense. I wasn't going to be able to change majors or continue studying computer science like I had planned. But I had no other choice. Survival came first. Finding work with no experience and only 3 years of incomplete college was brutal. I applied to like 30 different places, from retail stores to basic office jobs, and got rejection after rejection. I finally got a job at a diner called Sunnyside Diner, one of those classic American food places with red vinyl seats and an all-day breakfast menu. The manager, Gilbert, was an older guy, like 55 years old, who didn't ask many questions and hired me almost immediately for the kitchen. The pay was minimum wage, $7.25 an hour at that time, I think, plus tips that the servers shared with the kitchen, though that was very little. Doing the math, even working 40 hours a week, I was barely going to cover the basics. So, I also got a second job as a night security guard at an office building. It was one of those positions where you basically sit at a desk all night, check the cameras every hour, and make sure no one enters. It paid $10 an hour, and the shifts were 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week. My routine became this. I worked at the diner from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., slept from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m., worked as a security guard from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., got to the apartment, showered, and went back to the diner. The days I didn't have the night shift, I slept like 12 hours, trying to recover. I was exhausted all the time, living on coffee and diner food that Gilbert let me take for free. Like 3 months passed like that. 3 months of barely surviving, of counting every dollar, of having no social life because I was working or sleeping. Alexis stayed with me, but I could see she was worried. She told me I looked terrible, that this wasn't sustainable. Dominic was also worried. He'd find me sometimes asleep on the couch in weird positions because I simply collapsed from exhaustion. But at least I was paying my share of rent and saving a little bit each month, even if it was only like $50 or $100. Honestly, I didn't see a way out. I didn't see how things were going to get better, and there were nights at that security desk where I wondered if my parents had been right, if I should have just continued with the business degree. even though I hated it. But then, and this sounds like something from a movie, but I swear it happened. A guy named Mitchell, who was a regular customer at the diner, changed everything. Mitchell was like 40 years old, worked at some kind of tech startup, and always came for breakfast on Saturday mornings. He ordered the same thing, scrambled eggs with bacon and black coffee, and always left a good tip. One day I was on my break and sat down in the dining room because I was dead tired, and Mitchell was on his laptop having problems with something. Without thinking much, I asked him what was wrong, and he explained that his inventory program was giving him errors. I took a look. It was a relatively simple problem with the database, and I helped him fix it in like 10 minutes. Mitchell was impressed. He asked me where I had learned to do that, and I told him my whole story. Like no filter, that I had been studying business administration, but I was really passionate about programming, that I had taken elective classes, that I had been learning on my own, that my parents had kicked me out for wanting to change majors, everything. He listened to everything without interrupting, and when I finished, he told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Maxwell, right now there are thousands of companies looking for people who can do what you just did, and not all of them require you to have a degree." He asked if I had a portfolio with projects I had done, and I told him yes, that I had several programs and small applications I had developed. He asked me to send it to him and gave me his business card. I don't know why, but something in my head clicked at that moment. That same night, during my security shift, I opened my laptop and started working on my portfolio like crazy. I reorganized everything, added detailed descriptions of each project, uploaded everything to GitHub with proper documentation, basically made it look as professional as possible. I sent it to Mitchell at 5 a.m. and went home, praying that something would come of it. Mitchell responded 2 days later. He told me he had reviewed my work and was impressed, and that his company was looking for an entry-level worker. It wasn't pure programming. It was more technical support and system maintenance, but it was an entry into the tech world. He invited me to an informal interview at a coffee shop. I went there after my shift at the diner, probably smelling like kitchen grease, but I gave it my best. Mitchell introduced me to his boss, Denise, who was also there, and we talked for like an hour about technology, about my projects, about what I could do. A week later, they offered me the position. The starting pay was $15 an hour. Full-time, with basic benefits after 3 months. It wasn't a fortune, but it was double what I was earning at the diner and meant I could quit one of my jobs. I quit the diner that same day, though Gilbert was sad to see me go. He wished me luck and told me I'd always have a place there if things didn't work out, which was really kind of him. I kept the night security job just in case and because I wanted to keep saving, but at least I wasn't literally working 16 hours a day anymore. The company was small, like 20 employees, and they made custom software for medium-sized businesses. My job was basically to keep the systems running, solve technical problems, do updates, that kind of thing. But Denise noticed quickly that I could do more than just technical support. She started giving me small programming projects, things that needed automation or small internal tools. I'd stay late after my shift, before going to the security job, working on those projects and making sure they were perfect. I wanted to prove I was worth it, that Mitchell had made the right decision in giving me this opportunity. About 4 months in, they promoted me to full-time junior developer with a salary of $45,000 a year. It was the first time in almost a year that I breathed with relief. I finally quit the night, security job, and started sleeping like a normal person again. Alexis cried when I told her, from happiness this time, and Dominic took me out to celebrate. With beers we drank at the apartment because I still didn't have much extra money after paying off debts. Things started to improve little by little. I moved to my own small studio after like 6 months. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Alexis and I got more serious. She graduated from college and started working at a bank. I kept learning everything I could at work, taking free online courses at night, reading technical documentation, practicing with new programming languages. Denise became an incredible mentor. She taught me not just about code, but about how to manage projects, how to communicate with clients, how to build things that really solved problems. Fast forward like 2 years. I was 24 at that point and was leading my first big project for an important client of the company, a complete management system for a retail chain. It was a project worth like $200,000 for our small company, so there was a lot of pressure. I worked months on that project, practically lived at the office, but we delivered it on time and the client was super happy. That project put our company on the map and gave me a reputation in the local industry. That's when I started thinking seriously about starting my own company. I had learned so much in those 2 years, had built a network of contacts, had confidence in my technical skills, and now also in my business skills. Turns out all those business administration classes I had hated in college, well, I had absorbed more than I thought, and now they really served me when I combined them with my passion for technology. I talked to Alexis about the idea, and she supported me completely, told me to do it, that it was the right time. I started my company from my apartment, with $5,000 I had saved during those 2 years. I didn't quit my job immediately. That was too risky. But I started taking freelance projects on weekends, small jobs for local businesses that needed websites or simple systems. It took off faster than I expected. Satisfied clients referred me to other clients, and suddenly I had more work than I could handle alone. I hired 2 freelance programmers to help me, then another, then 2 more. 6 months in, I was officially my own boss, with a small company of 5 people, including me. The next 4 years were intense. I'm not going to lie and say everything was easy because there were difficult moments, projects that went wrong, difficult clients, cash flow problems, but the company grew. I hired more people. We moved to a real office. We got bigger clients. By the time I was 27, my company had 25 employees and was billing several million a year. I had a small but decent house, a new car. I was earning more money than I ever thought I would earn. Alexis and I got engaged and were planning the wedding. During all that time, since I was kicked out of the house, I had no contact with my parents. 0. They didn't try to communicate with me, and I didn't with them either. Alexis would sometimes ask me if I didn't miss having a relationship with them, if I didn't want to at least try to talk, and honestly, I didn't know what to answer. Part of me was still angry, betrayed, feeling like they had made their decision when they kicked me out. Another part of me felt this weird sadness when I saw families together, or when some friend talked about their parents. Like a void I tried to ignore by keeping myself busy with work. About 6 months ago, something changed. I was checking properties online because I was thinking about investing in real estate, and, out of curiosity, I searched for the address of the house where I grew up, and there it was, for sale. My parents' house was on the market for $450,000, which was a fair price for the area. I read the complete description, and it said the owners needed to sell quickly for personal reasons, which I found interesting. I called my lawyer, who handles all my legal business matters, and asked him to investigate what was going on. What he discovered was fascinating and a bit sad at the same time. Turns out my father's consulting firm had gone bankrupt like 2 years ago, around the time I was starting my own company. I don't know exactly what happened. Economic crisis, bad investments, something like that. My mother had also lost her job at some point. They had been living off savings, and now were in a complicated financial situation. They needed to sell the house to be able to move to something more affordable and pay off debts. It was ironic because if they had maintained contact with me, maybe I could have helped them, not financially at that point, but at least with advice or connections. But then I thought of something else. An idea formed in my head and I couldn't shake it. It was a bit vindictive, I admit, but I also felt it was something I needed to do, like closing a circle or something. I told my lawyer I wanted to buy the house, but completely anonymously. Through an LLC we created specifically for this transaction. My parents couldn't know who the buyer was until after everything was signed and finalized. The process took like 2 months. My lawyer made an offer of $430,000 in cash, a bit below the asking price, but it was a cash offer with no financing, so it was very attractive for sellers who needed to close quickly. My parents accepted almost immediately. During the entire closing process, I never appeared on any documents. Everything was in the name of the LLC. We signed all the papers, transferred the money, and I officially became the owner of the house where I grew up. What I did next probably sounds cruel. And Alexis actually tried to convince me not to do it, but I felt I needed to do it. See, in the sale contract there was a rent-back clause, the lawyer had negotiated, where the sellers could stay in the house as tenants for a short period after the sale to give them time to find another place. My parents agreed to stay for 3 months, paying rent of $2,000 a month, which was standard for a house that size in that area. I waited until the exact day the initial rent-back period expired. I prepared everything, hired a property manager to handle communication, but insisted on being present for the final meeting. My lawyer scheduled an appointment at the house to discuss the extension of the lease contract, and my parents thought they were going to meet some representative of the owner. They didn't know the owner was going to show up in person. I arrived at the house, which I hadn't seen inside in more than 6 years. On a Friday afternoon, I rang the doorbell and my mother opened the door. The expression on her face when she saw me was something I'll never forget, like complete shock mixed with confusion. She said, "My name," like a question, Maxwell, as if she wasn't sure it was really me. My father appeared behind her, and froze too. I told them, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. It's been a long time," and I walked into the house without waiting for an invitation because technically it was my house now. They sat on the couch, the same couch where we used to watch TV on weekends, and I stood. My father was the first to speak, asked what I was doing there. I explained the whole situation calmly, that I was the anonymous buyer, that I now owned the house, that they had been paying me rent for the last 3 months without knowing it. I could see them processing the information, the confusion turning into understanding, and then into something like horror. My mother started to say something about how this was ridiculous, that it couldn't be true, but I took out all the legal papers and showed them. Everything was there, completely legal and valid. I told them they had 2 options. They could move out within the next month as stipulated in the original contract, or they could stay, but the new lease conditions would be $6,000 a month, triple what they were paying. I knew they couldn't afford that. That's why I set it so high. I was basically forcing them to leave. My father tried to talk to me, started to say we could work this out, that we were family, and that made me angry because I said seriously, "Now we're family. After you kicked me out when I was 22 years old for wanting to follow my dreams, now that you need something, you remember we're family." My mother started crying, saying they had made a mistake, that they were going through a difficult time back then. All the typical excuses. But I was no longer that scared. 2-year-old kid with no money. I no longer needed their approval or their love. I gave them the papers with the new lease conditions and told them they had a week to decide. Then I left the house without looking back. Alexis was waiting for me in the car and I could see she was. I worried. She asked me how I felt, and honestly, I didn't know what to say. I had imagined that moment for months. I thought I'd feel vindicated or satisfied, but what I really felt was empty, like I had closed a door that part of me wanted to leave at least a little bit open. My parents tried to call me several times that week, but I didn't answer. They finally contacted my lawyer and informed him they would move out within the month. The property manager supervised the entire moving process and the return of keys. I sold the house 2 months later for $470,000, so I even made money on the transaction. Though that was never really the point. Here I am now, 6 months after all that. My company keeps growing. I married Alexis 2 months ago in a small but beautiful wedding, and objectively, my life is good. But I still think about my parents sometimes. I wonder where they're living, how they're handling everything. Alexis tells me that if I want to have a relationship with them, it's not too late, that I could try to contact them now that I proved my point. But honestly, I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to open myself up again to people who showed me their love was conditional, that it was based on me doing what they wanted. Dominic, who was my lifeline 6 years ago, now works for my company in the sales department and is doing very well. Gilbert from the diner sent me a congratulations card when he heard about my company's success. Someone told him about me, and that made me smile. Mitchell is still a friend, and every now and then we have lunch to catch up. Denise came to my wedding and told me she was proud of me, which meant more than she probably knows. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had simply given in 6 years ago, if I had continued with the business degree to keep the peace with my parents. I'd probably be miserable at some corporate job I hated, maybe earning good money but feeling empty inside. Or maybe I would have found a way to be happy eventually. I don't know, and I guess I'll never know. What I do know is that those were the worst months of my life, sleeping on a friend's couch, working 2 jobs and barely surviving, thinking maybe I'd never get out of that hole. But I also know those months taught me more about resilience, about determination, about who I really am, than any college class. Did I do the right thing with the house? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me feels it was an unnecessarily cruel move, that I had already won simply with my success, that I didn't need to rub it in their faces that way. But another part of me feels I needed that closure. I needed to show them, and maybe show myself, that I survived and thrived, not thanks to them, but despite them. Maybe in a few more years I'll see things differently. Maybe there will come a point where I can forgive them completely and rebuild some kind of relationship. Or maybe not. For now, I'm focused on building my life with Alexis, on growing my company, on surrounding myself with people who support me unconditionally. And the ironic thing about all this is that I ended up using both my programming skills and what I learned about business. Turns out I didn't have to choose between being good at technology or good at business. I could be both. My parents never understood that. They thought it was a binary choice when in reality, the two things complement each other perfectly. If they had had even a little bit of faith in me, if they had supported me or at least not kicked me out, maybe we'd be celebrating my successes together instead of being completely separated. But they chose their path and I chose mine. And even though mine started with sleeping on a couch and flipping burgers, at least it was my choice. It was my life. And that in the end is what matters most, I guess.